You never feel happy. Never feel happy. No, you won't. Until you try. You never feel happy.
Good afternoon and welcome to session 10. How are you? Thank you. Chris and Kelly asked me to curate the global session. So we decided to look for inspiration in the speakers that have given TEDx talks around the world. Many of us heard from Jay Arati, our TEDx director, earlier today at Inside TED, that we've already had more than 72,000 TEDx talks around the world in 50 languages in these 170 countries. Now, that's a large number of talks. Just to give you a sense for what that means, if you take those 72,000 talks, you transcribe them, you print them, you would get a book roughly the size of Craig Vendor's. I haven't printed that, but Well, the network is made up of thousands of volunteer TEDx organizers and translators that engage their local communities around ideas and then spread them globally. By the way, if you happen to come from a country that is still white on the map, you know what you have to do when you get back home on Monday. Apply for a license and organize the first TEDx in your country. That would be fantastic. So, in this session, we'll look at the world as illuminated by the TEDx speakers. It would be impossible to fully capture the breadth and depth of the ideas and the speakers in the TEDx events. So to focus our search, we chose a theme, the dreams that define us. But still, selecting the 6 speakers that we have in this session has been a daunting task. So here they are. The speakers in this session were born here. They spent time or grew up in all these places. They gave TEDx talks in these cities, and they flew into Vancouver to join us during this week at TED. I don't really know if this session is going to be the most global session ever. I doubt it. But there is one thing I'm willing to bet with anyone, and that is that of all the TED sessions in history, this is going to be the one with the most heavy accents. So, are you ready? Let's start exploring the ideas that define us with our first speaker. You know, there are 2 areas of research where we've made tremendous progress over the last few years: neuroscience and big data. We are starting to understand how our brains work, and we are gaining insights into many aspects of life by looking at large sets of data. What if we bring these 2 disciplines together? Can we find better answers to our questions? Or even better, can we come up with new and more interesting questions? That's exactly what our first speaker has been doing for the last 15 years. And today, he will share with us some very surprising results. Please give a great and warm welcome to Mariano Sigman.
We have historical records that allow us to know how the ancient Greeks dressed, how they lived, how they fought. But how did they think? One natural idea is that the deepest aspects of human thought, our ability to imagine, to be conscious, to dream, have always been the same. Another possibility is that the social transformations that have shaped our culture may have also changed the structural columns of human thought. We may all have different opinions about this. Actually, it's a long-standing philosophical debate. But is this question even amenable to science? Here, I'd like to propose that in the same way that we can reconstruct how the ancient Greek cities looked like, just based on a few bricks, that the writings of a culture are the archaeological records, the fossils of human thought. And in fact, doing some form of psychological analysis of some of the most ancient books of human culture, Julian Jaynes came in the 70s with a very wild and radical hypothesis. That only 3,000 years ago, humans were what today we would call schizophrenics. And he made this claim based on the fact that the first humans described in these books behaved consistently in different traditions and in different places of the world, as if they would be hearing and obeying voices that they perceived as coming from the gods or from the muses, what today we would call hallucinations. And only then, as time went on, they began to recognize that they were the creators, the owners of these inner voices. And with these, they gained introspection, the ability to think about their own thoughts. So this theory is, Jaynes' theory is that consciousness, at least in the way we perceive it today, where we feel that we are the pilots of our own existence, is a quite recent cultural development. And this theory is quite spectacular, but it has an obvious problem, which is that it's built on just a few and very specific examples. So the question is whether the theory that introspection built up in human history only about 3,000 years ago can be examined in a quantitative and objective manner. And the problem on how to go about this is quite obvious. It's not like Plato woke up one day and then he wrote, "Hello, I'm Plato, and as of today I have a fully introspective consciousness." And this tells us actually what is the essence of the problem. We need to find the emergence of a concept that's never said. The word introspection does not appear a single time in the books we want to analyze. So our way to solve this is to build the space of words. This is a huge space that contains all words in such a way that the distance between any two of them is indicative of how closely related they are. So for instance, you'd want the words dog and cat to be very close together, but the words grapefruit and logarithm to be very far away. And this has to be true for any two words within this space. And there are different ways that we can construct this space of words. One is just asking the experts, a bit like we do with dictionaries. Another possibility is following the simple assumption that when two words are related, they tend to appear in the same sentences, in the same paragraphs, in the same documents, more often than would be expected just by pure chance. And this simple hypothesis, this simple method, with some computational tricks that have to do with the fact that this is a very complex and high-dimensional space, turns out to be quite effective. And just to give you a flavor of how well this works, this is the results we get when we analyze this for some of the some familiar words. And you can see first that words automatically organize into semantic neighborhoods. So you get the fruits, the body parts, the computer parts, the scientific terms, and so on. The algorithm also identifies that we organize concepts in a hierarchy. So for instance, you can see that the scientific terms break down into two subcategories of the astronomic and the physics terms. And then there are very fine things. For instance, the word astronomy, which seems a bit bizarre where it is, it's actually exactly where it should be, between what it is, a natural science, and between what it describes, the astronomical terms. And we could go on and on with this. Actually, if you stare at this for a while and you just build random trajectories, you will see that it feels, well, actually it feels a bit like doing poetry. And this is because, on a way, walking in this space is like walking in the mind. And the last thing is that this algorithm also identifies what are our intuitions of which words should live in the neighborhood of introspection. So for instance, words such as self, guilt, reason, emotion are very close to introspection. But other words such as red, football, candle, banana are just very far away. And so once we've built this space, the question of the history of introspection, or of the history of any concept, which before could seem abstract and somehow vague, becomes concrete, becomes amenable to quantitative science. All what we have to do is take the books, we digitize them, and we take this stream of words as a trajectory and project them into this space. And then we ask whether this trajectory spends significant time circling closely to the concept of introspection. And with this, we could analyze the history of introspection in the ancient Greek tradition, for which we have the best available written record. So what we did is we took all the books, we just ordered them by time. For each book, we take the words and we project them to this space. And then we ask for each word how close it is to introspection, and we just average that. And then we ask whether as time goes on, these books get closer and closer and closer to the concept of introspection. And this is exactly what happens in the ancient Greek tradition. So you can see that for the oldest books in the Homeric tradition, there is a small increase with books getting closer to introspection, but about 4 centuries before Christ, this starts ramping up very rapidly to an almost 5-fold increase of books getting closer and closer and closer to the concept of introspection. And one of the nice things about this is that now we can ask whether this is also true in a different independent tradition. So we just ran the same analysis on the Judeo-Christian tradition, and we got virtually the same pattern. Again, you see a small increase for the oldest books in the Old Testament, and then it increases much more rapidly in the new books of the New Testament. And then we get a peak of introspection in the work Confessions of St. Augustine, about 4 centuries after Christ. And this was very important, because St. Augustine had been recognized by scholars, philologists, historians, as one of the founders of introspection. Actually, some believe him to be the father of modern psychology. So our algorithm, which has the virtue of being quantitative, of being objective, and of course of being extremely fast, it just runs in a fraction of a second, can capture some of the most important conclusions of this long tradition of investigation. And this is, in a way, one of the beauties of science, which is that now this idea can be translated and generalized to a whole lot of different domains. So in the same way that we asked about the past of human consciousness, maybe the most challenging question we can pose to ourselves is whether this can tell us something about the future of our own consciousness. To put it more precisely, whether the words we say today can tell us something of where our minds will be in a few days, in a few months, or a few years from now. And in the same way, many of us are now wearing sensors that detect our heart rate, our respiration, our genes, on the hopes that this may help us prevent diseases. We can ask whether monitoring and analyzing the words we speak, we tweet, we email, we write, can tell us ahead of time whether something may go wrong with our minds. And with Guillermo Secchi, who has been my brother in this adventure, we took on this task. And we did so by analyzing the recorded speech of 34 young people who were at a high risk of developing schizophrenia. And so what we did is we measured speech at day 1, and then we asked whether the properties of this speech could predict within a window of almost 3 years the future development of psychosis. But despite our hopes, we got failure after failure. There was just not enough information in semantics to predict the future organization of the mind. It was good enough to distinguish between a group of schizophrenics and a control group, a bit like we had done for the ancient texts, but not to predict the future onset of psychosis. But then we realized that maybe the most important thing was not so much what they were saying, but how they were saying it. More specifically, it was not in which semantic neighborhoods the words were, but how far and fast they jumped from one semantic neighborhood to the other one. And so we came up with this measure, which we term semantic coherence, which essentially measures the persistence of speech within one semantic topic, within one semantic category. And it turned out to be that for this group of 34 people, the algorithm based on semantic coherence could predict with 100% accuracy who would develop psychosis and who would not. And this was something that could not be achieved, not even close, with any of all the other existing clinical measures. And I remember vividly while I was working on this, I was sitting on my computer and I saw a bunch of tweets by Polo. Polo had been my first student back in Buenos Aires, and at the time he was living in New York. And there was something in these tweets. I could not tell exactly what, because nothing was said explicitly. But I got this strong hunch, this strong intuition that something was going wrong. So I picked up the phone, and I called Polo, and in fact he was not feeling well. And this simple fact, that reading in between the lines, I could sense through words his feelings, was a simple but very effective way to help. What I told you today is that we're getting close to understand how we can convert this intuition that we all have, that we all share, into an algorithm. And on doing so, we may be seeing in the future a very different form of mental health based on objective, quantitative, and automated analysis of the words we write, of the words we say. Gracias.
So, Mariano, great talk, thank you. A couple of questions. So it seems that through analyzing speech, we have a window into the mind and the organization of our thoughts. How much information, how long of a speech do you need to be able to analyze things and get reliable results?
So for this, it was an hour of speech, but it was very like a structured interview. So this is the amount of time that you need depends on what conclusions you want to get and what type of data you have. So 1 hour is a reasonable time scale, but I mean, of course, it's not the answer for all the problems. But if it would be on free speech, we would need much more time. But even then, 1 hour of the hours we speak and the words we write and so on is just like a drop on an ocean of data.
That's fantastic. So that means that once this is well developed and it becomes an algorithm that gives reliable results, would that mean that eventually we'll be able to predict psychosis and have a shrink in our phone?
So, I mean, the algorithm is very simple. So, of course, it fits on your phone, and it can be there very easily. It's not a shrink in the sense that in the same way that, like, when we detect heart rate, if you see an anomaly there, that's not that doesn't give you a solution. It just tells you that maybe you should go see the cardiologist. I think that the responsible use for that here would be exactly the same. That may just be a way for flagging things so that we have a way of detecting information and then it's routed to the appropriate persons.
That's fantastic. Mariano Sigman, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
Don't go away, wait. I'm going to ask a question to the audience. Who in the audience has given at least one TED or TEDx talk? Show me. Wow, quite a few of those. Well, those of you know how difficult it is to prepare for one of these talks. But for the others that have not yet been on a stage, I'd like to share today, for the very first time, 2 tools, 2 secret tools that we use to prepare our speakers. Let's see them.
Here I'd like to propose that in the same way we can reconstruct how the ancient Greek cities look like, based only on a few bricks.
We have historical records that allow us to know how the ancient Greeks dressed, how they lived, how they fought, but how did they think?
Mariano Sigman. All right. What do you dream about when you're young and your continent, your entire continent is not what you would hope? Our next speaker is the youngest in our session, and she's going to share her dream with us. Please welcome to the stage, Ziyanda Mohutsiwa.
It began with one question. If Africa was a bar, what would your country be drinking or doing? I kicked it off with a guess about South Africa, which wasn't exactly according to the rules because South Africa is not my country, but alluding to the country's continual attempts to build a post-racial society after being ravaged by decades by apartheid, I tweeted, if Africa was a bar, South Africa would be drinking all kinds of alcohol and begging them to get along in its stomach. And then I waited. Then I had that funny feeling where I wondered if I crossed the line, so I sent out a few other tweets about my own country and a few other African countries I'm familiar with. And then I waited again, but this time, I read through almost every tweet I had ever tweeted to convince myself, no, to remind myself that I'm really funny, and that if nobody gets it, that's fine. But luckily, I didn't have to do that for very long, very soon, people were participating. In fact, by the end of that week in July, the hashtag If Africa Was a Bar would have garnered around 60,000 tweets, lit up the continent, and made its way to publications all over the world. People were using the hashtag to do many different things. To poke fun at their stereotypes, to criticize government spending, to make light of geopolitical tensions, to remind us that even in Africa, there's some countries we don't know exist, and also to make fun of the countries that don't think that they're in Africa. And to note the countries that had made a big turnaround. But most importantly, people were using the hashtag to connect. People were connecting over their Africanness. So for 1 week in July, Twitter became a real African bar. And I was really thrilled. Firstly, because I got on BBC and CNN and all that. But mainly because I realized that Pan-Africanism could work. That we had before us, between us, at our fingertips, a platform that just needed a small spark to light in us a hunger for each other. My name is Sianda Muhutiwa. I'm 22 years old, and I am Pan-Africanist by birth. Now, I say I'm Pan-Africanist by birth because my parents are from 2 different African countries. My father's from a country called Botswana in southern Africa. It's only slightly bigger than Germany. This year we celebrate our 50th year of stable democracy, and it has some very progressive social policies. My mother's country is the Kingdom of Swaziland. It's a very, very small country, also in southern Africa. It is Africa's last complete monarchy. So it's been ruled by a king and a royal family in line with their tradition for a very long time. On paper, these countries seem very different. And when I was a kid, I could see the difference. It rained a lot in one country. It didn't rain quite as much in the other. But outside of that, I didn't really realize why it mattered that my parents were from 2 different places. But it would go on to have a very peculiar effect on me. You see, I was born in one country and raised in the other. When we moved to Botswana, I was a toddler who spoke fluent Seswati and nothing else. So I was being introduced to my new home, my new cultural identity, as a complete outsider, incapable of comprehending anything that was being said to me by the family and country whose traditions I was meant to move forward. But very soon, I would shed Seswati, and when I would go back to Swaziland, I would be constantly confronted by how very non-Swazi I was becoming. Add to that, my entry into Africa's private school system, whose entire purpose is to beat the Africanness out of you, and I would have a very peculiar adolescence. But I think that my interest in ideas of identity was born here, in the strange intersection of belonging to 2 places at once, but not really belonging to either one very well, and belonging to this vast space in between and around simultaneously. I became obsessed with the idea of a shared African identity. Since then, I have continued to read about politics and geography and identity and what all those things mean. I've also held on to a deep curiosity about African philosophies. When I began to read, I gravitated towards the works of Black intellectuals like Steve Biko and Frantz Fanon, who tackled complex ideas like decolonization and Black consciousness. And when I thought at 14 that I had digested these grand ideas, I moved on to the speeches of iconic African statesmen like Burkina Faso's Thomas Sankara and Congo's Patrice Lumumba, I read every piece of African fiction that I could get my hands on. So when Twitter came, I hopped on with the enthusiasm of a teenage girl whose friends are super, super bored of hearing about all this random stuff. The year was 2011, and all over Southern Africa and the whole continent, affordable data packages for smartphones and internet surfing became much more easier to get. So my generation, we were sending messages to each other on this platform that just needed 140 characters and a little bit of creativity on long commutes to work, in lectures that some of us should have been paying attention to, on our lunch breaks. We would communicate as much as we could about the everyday realities of being young and African. But of course, this luxury was not available to everyone else, to everybody. So this meant that if you were a teenage girl in Botswana and you wanted to have fun on the internet, 1, you had to tweet in English. 2, you had to follow more than just the 3 other people you knew online. You had to follow South Africans, Zimbabweans, Ghanaians, Nigerians, and suddenly your whole world opened up. And my whole world did open up. I followed vibrant Africans who were traveling around the continent, taking pictures of themselves and posting them under #MyAfrica. Because at that time, if you were to search Africa on Twitter or on Google or on any kind of social media, you would think that the entire continent was just pictures of animals and white guys drinking cocktails in hotel resorts. But Africans were using this platform to kind of take some kind of ownership of that tourism sectors. It was Africans taking selfies on the beaches of Nigeria. It was Africans in cocktail bars in Nairobi. And these are the same Africans that I began to meet on my own travels around the continent. We would discuss African literature, politics, economic policy, but almost invariably, every single time, we would end up discussing Twitter. And that's when I realized what this was. We were standing in the middle of something amazing, because for the first time ever, young Africans could discuss the future of that continent in real time, without the restriction of borders, finances, and watchful governments. Because the little-known truth is, many Africans know a lot less about other African countries than some Westerners might know about Africa as a whole. This is by accident, but sometimes it's by design. For example, in apartheid South Africa, Black South Africans were constantly being bombarded with this message that any country ruled by Black people was destined for failure. And this was done to convince them that they were much better off under crushing white rule than they were living in a Black and free nation. Add to that Africa's colonial, archaic education system, which has been unthinkingly carried over from the 1920s. And at the age of 15, I could name all the various causes of the wars that had happened in Europe in the past 200 years, but I couldn't name the president of my neighboring country. And to me, this doesn't make any sense, because whether we like it or not, the fates of African people are deeply intertwined. When disaster hits, when turmoil hits, we share the consequences. When Burundians flee political turmoil, they go to us, to other African countries. Africa has 6 of the world's largest refugee centers. What was once a Burundian problem becomes an African problem. So to me, there are no Sudanese problems or South African problems or Kenyan problems, only African problems, because eventually we share the turmoil. So if we share the problems, why aren't we doing a better job of sharing the successes? How can we do that? Well, in the long term, we can shoot towards increasing intra-African trade, removing borders and putting pressure on leaders to fulfill regional agreements they've already signed. But I think that the biggest way for Africa to share its successes is to foster something I like to call social Pan-Africanism. Now, political Pan-Africanism already exists, so I'm not inventing anything totally new here. But political Pan-Africanism is usually the African unity of the political elite. And who does that benefit? Well, African leaders almost exclusively. No, what I'm talking about is the Pan-Africanism of the ordinary African. Young Africans like me, we are bursting with creative energy, with innovative ideas. But with bad governance and shaky institutions, all of this potential could go to waste. On a continent where more than a handful of leaders have been in power longer than the majority of our populations have been alive, we are in desperate need of something new, something that works. And I think that thing is social Pan-Africanism. My dream is that young Africans stop allowing borders and circumstance to suffocate our innovation. My dream is that when a young African comes up with something brilliant, they don't say, well, this wouldn't work in my country, and then give up. My dream is that young Africans begin to realize that the entire continent is our canvas, is our home. In Africa, we say, using the internet, we can begin to think collaboratively. We can begin to innovate together. In Africa, we say, if you want to go fast, you go alone. But if you want to go far, you go together. And I believe that social Pan-Africanism is how we can go far together. And this is already happening. Access to these online networks has given young Africans something we've always had to violently take, a voice. We now have a platform. Before now, if you wanted to hear from the ministry, from the youth in Africa, you waited for the 65-year-old minister of youth to wake up in the morning, take his heartburn medication, and then tell you the plans he has for your generation in 20 years' time. Before now, if you wanted to be heard by your possibly tyrannical government, you were pushed to protest, suffer the consequences, and have your fingers crossed that some Western paper somewhere might make someone care. But now we have opportunities to back each other up in ways we never could before. We support South African students who are marching against ridiculously high tertiary fees. We support Zimbabwean women who are marching to parliament. We support Angolan journalists who are being illegally detained. For the first time ever, African pain and African aspiration has the ability to be witnessed by those who can empathize with it the most, other Africans. I believe that with a social Pan-Africanist thinking and using the internet as a tool, we can begin to rescue each other and ultimately to rescue ourselves. Thank you.
If you're watching from a Simulcast Lounge, there are a few seats still available here, so you're welcome to join us here in the main theater. As you know, each TEDx organizer around the world has a dream that defines what they do. Many TEDx organizers are showing their communities what's going on this week at TED through TEDx Live events. And they just sent us a few things describing their dreams. Let's see it. we have an amazing TEDx community around the world, so a big applause for all those organizers that help us build that. I'm sure your mother told you not to play with your food. But at the same time, I'm almost sure that she encouraged you to be creative and look for innovations. Now you will see something your mother never expected. Please welcome Lindsay Pollack.
Thank you. We can choose to look at the world taking things for granted, certain expectations, thinking of the objects around us having certain singular uses or functions, or we can choose a different way of looking at the world, not taking things for granted, and then a whole range of other possibilities come up. So, for example, a rubber glove, no longer just for the washing up, but for a bagpipe. A garbage bag, no longer just for holding the garbage, but just cutting a little piece of it, stretching it across a water pipe, blowing air, and suddenly you've got a membrane reed which creates the sound. As we get older, we tend to look at the world taking more things for granted, having more assumptions, and forgetting to approach the world in a more childlike manner when we were kids. And so I'm going to now do that. Let's use a little bit of childlike curiosity and take a carrot, and let's imagine for a moment that it's not for eating. Let's turn it into a musical instrument. So I'm going to turn this carrot into a clarinet. First of all, I'm going to cut it to length. And what I'm going to do with, like many of the instruments that I make, which are wind instruments, I need a tube where the column of air can vibrate. So in this case, we don't have a tube, but we have a potential tube. So I'm going to actually, first of all, mark 6 finger holes down the front. So this is something very, very simple. It's something that you can all do. In fact, if it's something that you do want to do, I've put all the measurements up on YouTube. You just have to go to YouTube, type in, make your own carrot clarinet. Okay, so there's my 6 finger holes, my thumb hole, and now the tricky bit. Okay, here we go. So as I said, we need a tube, because all sound is vibration, and we're going to make a column of air vibrate. In this case, it's a hole that's causing this tube. Okay, for those of you that want to try this, I'm now moved to a 7mm drill bit with a 12mm drill bit. And if anyone's coming from Europe, in a month's time we're going to create the world's largest carrot clarinet orchestra for the Dutch Clarinet Festival. Thanks very much. Just kidding.
Lindsay Pollack, ladies and gentlemen. Who can play chess? Who knows how to move the chess pieces here? By show of hands. Okay. Who would consider himself or herself a reasonable good chess player? Fewer. Okay. Okay, good. You know, they say, or it is said, that chess is the game of life. Okay. For some people, chess even becomes their life, and sometimes they become the dream that defines them. Our next speaker is considered the best female chess player in history. She's been #1 in the world for 25 years. And she lives her life the same way she plays. You will see. Please welcome Judith Polgar.
Hi, welcome everybody. Before I was born, my parents decided that I was going to be a genius. Chess is a game that you can learn the basic rules in about 15 minutes, but it has more combinations than atoms in the universe. Chess was and still is, up to today, a male-dominated sport. Was it realistic for my parents to think that I can become the ultimate world chess champion? Both of my parents are teachers. We lived in Hungary, modest conditions, behind the Iron Curtain. By the beginning of the 80s, I started to get interested about the game. By this time, both of my sisters were playing competitive chess. My mother taught me the first moves when I was about 5 years old, and we lived in a small apartment where my sister Susan had already serious chess trainings in the living room behind closed doors. I very much wanted to go into that room, but it was forbidden for me, as my parents told me, you can enter once you learn how to play chess. So obviously, I was very motivated to learn the game. In the beginning, it was only a game for me, but it became gradually competitive. It suited very much to my character, as from a very early age, I loved challenges. By practicing daily chess, chess became as my native language. I never forget when I was just 7 years old and I was standing in the main square of a town in Hungary, and there were 15 chessboards set up, and I was playing with 15 opponents simultaneously, and I beat them all. But what was even more fun, when a bit later I was playing and winning against grown-up men, playing blindfolded, which means in chess that I was with my back to the chessboard and calling out the moves like Queen G8, check. My opponent would see the board, and while making the move, would give the answer, Rook takes G8, and I would go Knight F7, checkmate. Of course, at this point, I was giggling. To give checkmate, it's always fun, especially to adults. Let me take you back in time to Greece when I was only 12 years old in 1988. It was a milestone in my career as I was for the first time part of the women's Olympic national team. But what was really great, that I was playing together with my sisters in one team, side by side. A journalist years later told me that when the reporters saw the list, the Hungarian teenage team, they considered it's going to be a nice side story of the event. But it turned out that I was winning one game after the other, and our team was winning day by day, and we became the story of the event. As the coolest thing was that we broke down the 30 years of Soviet hegemony by winning the Olympic gold medal for the first time. But I can recall a very special moment for me, which I keep in my memory, when I was playing in this Olympiad game 10. I was concentrated very much on the board, and after calculating some lines, I looked up from the chessboard, and who did I see? The world champion, Garry Kasparov, watching my game. Wow. The player who I admired and I respected so much, and I learned so much from his games. It gave me inspiration and gave me energy too. I smashed my opponent in that game within a few moves. After the Olympiad, a journalist asked Kasparov, what does he think about my chess? Do you think that it's possible that one day Judith will challenge you? He would say, I'm absolutely sure that she's going to become the women's world chess champion, but if we will play? And then he continued that I'm convinced that it's almost impossible. Almost. As a matter of fact, he was not the only world champion thinking similarly about women's chess. As a matter of fact, the legendary Bobby Fischer once said, I can give a knight oath to any woman player in the world, and I can still beat her. But to give you a perspective, what is to give a knight oath in chess, it's like entering in a swimming competition, having your hands behind, tied your hands behind your back before jumping into the pool. So you can imagine how happy I was at the age of 15 when I broke Bobby Fischer's record, becoming the youngest grandmaster. Thank you. By this time, I was the #1 woman player in the world. But my real dream was to become the ultimate #1 between men and women. I knew I have a very long road ahead of me. When for the first time I met Kasparov, it was an exceptional experience for me. He has such a charisma, strong presence, and incredible deep chess preparation. Practically, I've lost the game before even making a single move. You may ask, how is that possible, right? It's because I had great respect for his chess, and psychology is a very big part of the game. Imagine Kasparov walks into the playing hall and sits down opposite to you. I had the feeling that he wants to eat me up alive. It took me years until I figured out a strategy that worked against him. I gave him a hard time in this game. First of all, I built up my self-confidence, and I used his own weapon against him. When I was playing this game, my focus was that I will attack his king aggressively. No matter what happens on the chessboard, I will stick to my plan. At one point, he started to feel uncomfortable, and he took off his jacket, put it on the chair, took off his watch, put it next to the chessboard. And from his body language, it was obvious that he didn't feel good at all. I even had the feeling for a fraction of a second that he had it in mind that maybe he might even lose the game. But he escaped this time. But I felt that victory was within reach. Our next encounter was a bit more than a year when we met again over the chessboard. And it was very interesting that Kasparov also had this very aggressive style, and he wanted to kill the opponent. But in this game, he chose the very modest opening, which was very calm. We exchanged the queens already at the very beginning of the game to enter into calmer positions. But in the middle of the game, when we entered into the crucial situation when he captured one of my pieces, instead of capturing it back the natural way, I was playing with my rook the unexpected move to the middle of the board, and I was attacking his king again. It turned out to be a decisive move, and within the moves, Kasparov had a difficult position. He couldn't stop my threat of giving a checkmate, and he resigned. This game gave me a lot of energy and strength to fight in my upcoming tournaments, events, competitions, and I fought myself into the top 10. Practice, perseverance, and passion. These are key elements of my success. But you may ask whether did I accomplished my dream to become the world #1 in ultimate competition? And I have to say, no, I did not. But I did challenge all the top grandmasters. I played in the World Championship tournaments, and I did beat 11 respected world champions. Thank you. After those championships, tournaments, challenges, fights, victories, I have a new dream. My dream is to see educational chess in all elementary schools, because I strongly believe that chess is not only a game, sport, and part of culture, but it is an essential educational tool. I was very fortunate when I was very little to learn the game of chess. It gave me a lot. It gave me a lot of success, happiness over the chessboard. But it gave me much more. It gave me life skills which I use in everyday life, whatever I do. In our multitasking world, I think creativity, logical thinking, problem solving, and good decision making are essential skills. But until my new dream becomes reality, I like to inspire people, especially youngsters, to dream big. Make good moves in life, set your goals high, and reach the impossible. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. Question. You said that you had to develop your own aggressive style to be successful in a male-dominated sport like chess. Tell us more about that style. How is it?
Well, it means on the chessboard that I was always going for the king.
Okay.
And I wanted to win the game as soon as possible. I was creating opportunities from nothing, like from a sunny day, the thunder comes. And that's the image I had from a very early age, like
right.
11 or so.
Would you be willing to share with us one of your games?
Sure.
Do we have a board here? So what game are you going to show us? Who are you playing against?
I played the game against Karpov. This time he was the victim.
I'm Anatoly Karpov now.
Well,
Okay.
if you want to be,
Yes, I'm
Go ahead.
Karpov. This is chess as a second language. She's speaking chess now.
this was the position.
Okay, hold on. All right. So I'm counting, I have one more pawn than you. Does that mean that I'm ahead?
Well, in chess, well, first of all, many of my games were like this, that I was giving up my pieces in order to attack the king. And we usually say that I have compensation, like the black piece is very much out of the board on the side, and I have two bishops which can be very strong, so more or less the game is balanced, but it can be dangerous for black.
Okay, is it your turn now?
I played a very small move with my rook.
Okay, that's interesting. I see that you're indirectly defending this pawn that I could take with my queen, so maybe you are threatening me to take this pawn.
Exactly, this is what Karpov had in mind.
I'm Karpov. Okay, so I'm going to defend it like this.
And the interesting thing is that already Karpov was in time pressure, and he didn't realize that he's going to get mated very soon. But this time it's you.
But
I was sacrificing my bishop.
Yeah, it's not defended. I'll take it.
I would give a check.
Okay. I cannot go here, cannot go here. Only one. This is the only one I have, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And now I was sacrificing my next bishop in order to open up the king.
Okay.
So no pieces will defend
move here.
you.
I have no other option than to take your bishop. Okay.
Actually, Karpov resigned already here.
I'll keep playing. I'm the new Karpov. Check. Okay. Again, I have just one move, right?
Well, you have one move to go with your king.
Yes. This is the only one I can play.
And I would go checkmate with queen g5.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Judith Polgar.
Thank you.
I have a hidden agenda here. I always dreamed I would love to play against a grandmaster like Judith and be watched by 1,200 people. And I hope we got good pictures of that. Anyway. You know that the TEDx events around the world are just much more than just speakers and talks. Like what happens here at TED. TEDx events create experiences for their communities. Just a few examples, I mean hundreds of examples, but just a few. TEDx Portland organized a 600-person marathon through the city. TEDx Christchurch in New Zealand had a huge paella served as a community meal for their community. TEDx Rosario had a brainstorming session with more than 3,000 people to discuss potential solutions for the city's most pressing problems. Or at TEDx Rio de la Plata, the TEDx event that I host in Argentina, this happened when people went into one of the breaks. Let's see.
Liviamo negli eti gallici che la bellezza infiora e là fuggevo l'ora s'inebria volluta liviane dolci fremiti che suscita l'amore poiché quell'occhio al cuore onnipotente amore fra i gallici più caliva ci avrà. Tra voi saprò di vedere il tempo mio giocondo. Tu che follia nel mondo ciò che tu mi piace.
Years since we did this, and people are still talking about how deep that experience was to be there in person. I'm 42 years old. Am I lying or am I telling you the truth? How can you tell? There are certain people that are such good liars that nobody can tell. But their bodies do tell. Our next speaker is going to show us how. Please welcome Kang Lee.
Hi. Let me ask the audience a question. Did you ever lie as a child? If you did, could you please raise your hand? Wow, this is the most honest group of people I've ever met. So for the last 20 years, I've been studying how children learn to tell lies. And today, I'm going to share with you some of the discoveries that we have made. But to begin, I'm going to tell you a story from Mr. Richard Messina, who is my friend and the elementary school principal. He got a phone call one day. The caller says, "Mr. Messina, my son Johnny will not come to school today because he's sick." Mr. Messina asks, "Who am I speaking to, please?" And the caller says, "I am my father." So this story sums up very nicely 3 common beliefs we have about children and lying. 1, children only come to tell lies after entering elementary school. 2, children are poor liars. We adults can easily detect their lies. And 3, if children lie at a very young age, there must be some character flaws with them, and they are going to become pathological liars for life. Well, it turns out all the 3 beliefs are wrong. So we have been playing guessing games with children all over the world. So here's an example. So in this game, we ask children to guess the numbers on the cards. And we tell them if they win the game, they are going to get a big prize. But in the middle of the game, we make an excuse and leave the room. And before we leave the room, we tell them not to peek at the cards. Of course, we have hidden cameras in the room to watch their every move. Because the desire to win the game is so strong, more than 90% of children would peek as soon as we leave the room. The crucial question is, when we return and ask the children whether or not they have peeked, will the children who peeked confess or lie about their transgression? We found that regardless of gender, country, religion, at 2 years of age, 30% lie, 70% tell the truth about their transgression. At 3 years of age, 50% lie, and 50% tell the truth. At 4 years of age, more than 80% lie. And after 4 years of age, most children lie. So as you can see, lying is really a typical part of development. And some children begin to tell lies as young as 2 years of age. So now let's take a closer look at the younger children. Why some, but not all young children lie? As in cooking, you need good ingredients to cook good food. And good lying requires 2 key ingredients. The first key ingredient is theory of mind, or the mind-reading ability. Mind-reading is ability to know that different people have a different knowledge about the situation, and the ability to differentiate between what I know and what you know. Mind reading is important for lying is because the basis of lying is that I know you don't know what I know. Therefore, I can lie to you. The second key ingredient for good lying is self-control. It is the ability to control your speech, your facial expression, and your body language so that you can tell a convincing lie. And we found that those young children who have more advanced mind reading and self-control abilities tell lies earlier and are more sophisticated liars. As it turns out, these 2 abilities are also essential for all of us to function well in our society. In fact, deficits in mind reading and self-control abilities are associated with serious developmental problems such as ADHD and autism. So, if you discover your 2-year-old is telling his or her first lie, instead of being alarmed, you should celebrate. Because it signals that your child has arrived at a new milestone of typical development. Now, are children poor liars? Do you think you can easily detect their lies? Would you like to give it a try? Yes? Okay. So I'm going to show you 2 videos. In the videos, the children are going to respond to a researcher's question, did you peek? So try to tell me which child is lying and which child is telling the truth. So here's child number 1. Are you ready? Okay.
Did you peek? No.
And this is child number 2.
Did you peek? No.
Okay. If you think child number 1 is lying, please raise your hand. And if you think child number 2 is lying, please raise your hand. Okay, so as a matter of fact, child number 1 is telling the truth. Child number 2 is lying. Looks like many of you are terrible detectors of children's lies. So, as you can see, children's lies are very difficult to detect. And you may ask, why children's lies are so difficult to detect? So let me show you this as an illustration. So this is my own son, Nathan. This is his facial expression when he tells lies. Oh, sorry. Can I walk back? I made a mistake. Okay, I'm going to go back. Okay. Oops. So it looks like many of you are terrible detectors of children's lies. Now, we have played similar kind of games with many, many adults from all walks of life. And we show them many videos. In the videos, in half of the videos, the children lied. In the other half of the videos, children told the truth. And let's find out how these adults perform. Because there are as many liars as truth tellers, so if you guess randomly, there's a 50% chance you're going to get it right. So if your accuracy is around 50%, it means you are terrible detectors of children's lies. Okay, so let's start with undergrads and law school students who typically have limited experience with children. Let's see whether or not they can detect children's lies. No, they cannot detect children's lies. Their performance is around chance. Now, how about social workers and child protection lawyers who work with children on a daily basis? Can they detect children's lies? No, they cannot. What about judges, custom officers, and police officers who deal with liars on a daily basis? Can they detect children's lies? No, they cannot. What about parents? Can parents detect others' children's lies? No, they cannot. What about, can parents detect their own children's lies? No, they cannot. So now you may ask, why children's lies are so difficult to detect? So let me illustrate this with my own son, Nathan. So this is his facial expression when he lies. So when children lie, their facial expression is typically neutral. However, behind this neutral expression, the child is actually experiencing a lot of emotions, such as fear, guilt, shame, and maybe a little bit of liar's delight. Unfortunately, such emotions are either fleeting or hidden, therefore is mostly invisible to us. So in the last 5 years, we have been trying to figure out a way to reveal these hidden emotions. Then we made a discovery. We know that underneath our facial skin, there's a rich network of blood vessels. When we experience different emotions, our facial blood flow changes subtly. And these changes are regulated by the autonomic system that is beyond our conscious control. So by looking at facial blood flow changes, we can reveal people's hidden emotions. But unfortunately, such emotion-related facial expression, unfortunately, such emotion-related facial blood flow changes are too subtle to detect by our naked eye. So to help us reveal people's facial emotions, we have developed a new imaging technology we call transdermal optical imaging. To do so, we use a regular video camera to record people when people experience various hidden emotions. And then, using our image processing technology, we can extract transdermal images of facial blood flow changes. And by looking at transdermal video images, now we can easily see transdermal facial blood flow changes associated with the various hidden emotions. And using this technology, we can now reveal the hidden emotion associated with lying and therefore detect people's lies. We can do so non-invasively, remotely, inexpensively, with an accuracy at about 85%, which is far better than chance level. And in addition, we discovered a Pinocchio effect. No, not this Pinocchio effect. This is the real Pinocchio effect. When people lie, the facial blood flow on the cheeks decreases, and the facial blood flow on the nose increases. Of course, lying is not the only situation that will evoke our hidden emotions. So then we ask ourselves, in addition to detecting lies, how can our technology be used? One application is in education. For example, using this technology, we can help this mathematics teacher to identify the student in his classroom who may experience high anxiety about the topic he's teaching so that he can help him. And also we can use this in healthcare. For example, every day I Skype my parents who live thousands of miles away. And using this technology, I can not only find out what's going on in their lives, but also simultaneously monitor their heart rate, their stress level, their mood, and whether or not they are experiencing pain. And perhaps in the future, there are risks for heart attack or hypertension. And you may ask, can we use this also to reveal politicians' emotions? For example, during a debate. Well, the answer is yes. Using TV footages, we could detect the politicians' heart rate, mood, and stress, and perhaps in the future, whether or not they are lying to us. We can also use this in marketing research. For example, to find out whether or not people like certain consumer products. We can even use it in dating. So for example, if your date is smiling at you, this technology can help you to determine whether she actually likes you or she's just trying to be nice to you. And in this case, she's just trying to be nice to you. So transdermal optical imaging technology is at a very early stage of development. Many new applications will come about that we don't know today. However, one thing I know for sure is that lying will never be the same again. Thank you very much. 谢谢.
Well, we are arriving to the end. We have one more speaker, a great speaker. You know, it is said that art can change the world. It is also said that art can change the artist. In this case, art changes them both. Let's welcome Angelica Das.
It has been 128 years since the last country in the world abolished slavery, and 53 years since Martin Luther King pronounced his I Have a Dream speech. But we still live in a world where the color of our skin not only gives a first impression, but a lasting one that remains. I was born in a family full of colors. My father is the son of a maid from whom he inherited an intense dark chocolate tone. He was adopted by those who I know as my grandparents. The matriarch, my grandma, has a porcelain skin and a cotton-like hair. My grandpa was somewhere between vanilla and a strawberry yogurt tone, like my uncle and my cousin. My mother is a cinnamon skin, daughter of a native Brazilian with a pinch of hazel and honey, and a man mix of coffee with milk, but with a lot of coffee. She has two sisters, one in a toasted peanut skin, and the other, also adopted, more on the beige side, like a pancake. Growing up in this family, color was never important for me. Outside home, however, things were different soon. Color had many other meanings. I remember my first drawing lessons in school as a bunch of contradictory feelings. It was exciting and creative, but I never understood the unique flesh color pencil. I was made of flesh, but I wasn't pink. My skin was brown, and people said I was black. I was 7 years old with a mess of colors in my head. Later, when I took my cousin to school, I was usually taken for the nanny. By helping in the kitchen at a friend's party, people thought I was the maid. I was even treated like a prostitute just because I was walking alone in the beach with European friends. And many times, visiting my grandma or friends in upper-class buildings, I was invited not to use the main elevator, because in the end, with this color and this hair, I cannot belong to some places. In some way, I accept part of it. However, and I get used, in some way, I get used to it and accept part of it. However, something inside of me keeps revolving and struggling. Years later, I married a Spaniard, but not a Spaniard. I chose one with the skin color of a lobster when sunburned. Since of then, a new question started to chase me. What will be the color of your children? As you can understand, this is my last concern. But thinking about it, with my previous background, my story led me to make my personal exercise as a photographer. And that is how Human Eye was born. Human Eye is a pursuit to highlight our true colors, rather than through white, red, black, or yellow associated with race. It's a kind of game to question our codes. It's a work in progress for a personal story to a global history. I portrayed the subject in a white background. Then, I choose an 11 pixel square from the nose, paint the background, and look for the corresponding color in the industrial palette Pantone. I started with my family and friends. Then, more and more people joined the adventure, thanks to public calls coming to the social media. I thought that the main space to show my work was internet, because I want an open concept that invites everybody to push the share button in both the computer and their brain. The snowball started to roll. The project had a great welcome. Invitations, exhibitions, physical formats, galleries and museums just happened. And among them, my favorite, when Human Eye occupies public spaces and appears in the street. It fosters a popular debate and creates a feeling of community. I have portrayed more than 3,000 people in 13 different countries, 19 different cities around the world, just to mention some of them. For someone included in the Forbes list, to refugees who cross the Mediterranean by boat. In Paris, from the UNESCO headquarters to a shelter. And students, both in Switzerland and favelas in Rio de Janeiro. All kinds of beliefs, gender identities, or physical impairment. A newborn or terminal ill. We all together build Human Eye. Those portraits make us rethink how we see each other. When modern science is questioning the race concept, what does it mean for us to be black, white, yellow, red? Is it the eye, the nose, the mouth, the hair? Or does it have to do with our origin, nationality, or bank account? This personal exercise turned out to be a discovery. Suddenly, I realized that Human Eye was useful for many people. It represents a sort of mirror for those who cannot find themselves reflected in any label. It was amazing that people start to share their thoughts about the work with me. I have hundreds of that I will share with you too. A mother of an 11-year-old girl wrote me, "Very good for me as a tool to work on her confidence. As this past weekend, one of her girlfriends argued with her that she does not belong and should not be allowed to live in Norway. So, your work has a very special place in my heart, and it's very important for me." A woman shared her portrait on Facebook and wrote, "All my life, people from across the globe had difficulties to place me in a group, a stereotype, a box. Perhaps we should stop. Instead of framing, ask the individual, how would you label yourself? Then I would say, hi, I'm Maciel, I'm a Dominican Dutch, I grew up in a mixed family, and I'm a bisexual woman." Besides these unexpected and touch reactions, Human Eye find a new life in a different variety of fields. Just to show you some examples. Illustrators and art students using it as a reference for their sketches and studies. It's a collection of faces. Researchers in the fields of anthropology, physics, and neuroscience use Human Eye with different scientific approaches related to human ethnicity, optophysiology, face recognition, or Alzheimer's. One of the most important impacts of the project is that Human Eye was chosen to be the cover of Foreign Affairs, one of the most relevant political publications. And talking about foreign affairs, I found the perfect ambassadors for my project. Teachers. They are the ones that use Human Eye as a tool to educational purposes. Their passion encourages me to go back to a drawing classes. but this time as a teacher myself. My students, both adults and kids, paint their self-portrait, trying to discover their own and unique color. As a photographer, I realized that I can be a channel for others to communicate. As an individual, as Angelica, every time I take a picture, I feel that I'm sitting in front of a therapist. All the frustration, fear, and loneliness that I once felt becomes love. The last country in the world who abolished slavery is the country where I was born, Brazil. We still have to work hard to abolish discrimination. That remains a common practice worldwide, and that will not disappear by itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Angelica. Thank you very much. I understand that you've been taking pictures throughout the week to some of the TEDsters in our community. Is that right? How did it feel?
It was an awesome experience because I really have a very intimate conversation with different of us that maybe I can find. But I have to tell you that maybe I'm the luckiest speaker here, because I have 67 people of my family around here looking at the talk. So I really felt very lucky, and it was a very special moment with all of you. So I just have to thank for everybody that contribute to this work continuing growing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Angelica.